Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member? No names, just yes or no.
Sunday evening, I stood at the sink with my hands in soapy water and a stack of plates that felt like a job title. And when my mother said, in that voice she uses when she wants to brand something into your ribs, that I would always be second best, I nodded like a person who has heard a line so many times it starts to sound like the weather, and I kept stacking, because arguing has never bought me any peace in that house, and because I knew if I let the silence sit there it would make her a little nervous, and nervous is the closest thing to honest she ever gets, which is why I decided, right there with a wet dish towel in my hand, that I was done playing the helpful daughter who can take a punch and pass the salt in the same breath. And I do not mean I screamed or made a scene or threw a plate. I mean I did something that scared her more. I went quiet in a way that did not beg for forgiveness or approval, and I watched her eyes flick toward me like she could feel the ground move. And could not tell where the fault line was. You know how some families run on jokes and some run on faith and some run on chaos? Well, ours runs on the idea that my sister Laura is gold trim on everything and I am the wire hanger that keeps the closet organized, useful and invisible. And if that sounds bitter, then fine. It is bitter. It is also the truth I learned when I was a kid doing extra credit while Laura missed a deadline and still got praised for being such a shining star who simply needs a little support, and I carried that truth. Through every holiday where I cooked and she arrived late, through every crisis where I showed up with a plan and she showed up with a story, and through every phone call where our mother would sigh into the receiver and ask me to be the bigger person because Laura is sensitive and I am strong, which is a nice way to say they could dump the weight on me and call it a compliment. So when she hit me with that second best line, I did not argue statistics or history or fairness. I let the words sit in the air, and then I took my time finishing the kitchen. Not because I wanted to be a martyr, but because I wanted to notice the details I usually skip, like how the list on the fridge has my name next to nearly everything that looks like work and Laura's name next to the things that look like applause, and how the spare key to my apartment is still on my mother's ring even, though she never asks before using it, and how the family group text is named after Laura's childhood nickname like a trophy we all live inside. And I realized that I have been keeping this machine oiled for years, paying in time and kindness and patience, and then waiting for a receipt that never prints. I have told myself a lot of polite stories about why I do it, like it is easier to keep the peace, or it is just what eldest daughters do, or it is not worth fighting about, and maybe those stories helped me get through the worst years. But they also kept me on the hook, and the hook is where our mother likes me, because from there she can tug when Laura needs a pass or a bailout or a witness to how hard she tries, and I keep showing up like a dependable understudy who never gets the role but knows every line, which would be funny if it did not drain the life out of me, and I am telling you this not to make you feel sorry for me, but to explain why the revenge I chose does not look like fireworks. Because what this family worships is the performance of goodness, the big gesture, the public apology, the dramatic reconciliation, and that means the only thing that could change anything was refusing to perform, and refusing to make it easy, and refusing to carry the weight they call love. I rinsed the last glass, wiped my hands, and when my mother asked me to take the leftovers and drop them at Laura's place because Laura was tired and had a big week, I said I could not, and I did not stack an excuse on top of it. I did not offer trade-offs or sugar. I just said I could not, and then I took my bag from the chair without asking if she needed anything else, and when she made that small sound like she had stepped on a pebble in a new shoe, I looked at her the way she has looked at me my whole life, politely distant like I am a clerk who will be replaced by closing time, and I said that I would call her later in the week, not tomorrow, not in the morning, later in the week, because there is no emergency here, there is a habit, and I am no longer available for it. On the drive home I did not cry, I did not vent to a friend, I did not try to undo the moment by sending a soft text. I unlocked my door, and I changed the lock code that she knows from that time she insisted on feeding my cat when I was out of town. And I turned off the setting that shares my location with the family group, and I removed my card from the grocery delivery account that mysteriously started sending supplies to Laura's place every few weeks, which our mother always called a fair. exchange for all the help Laura gives with emotional support, and I sat at my kitchen table and wrote down one simple rule that sounds tiny until you try it, that I will not do anything for which I am treated as second best while doing it. And if that means some things do not get done, then they will not get done, and if that means some people are uncomfortable, then they will be uncomfortable. When my phone lit up the next morning with a list of errands and a reminder that Laura's big week meant she needed me to pick up a package and fix a paperwork issue and maybe swing by the dry cleaner, I let it roll to voicemail, and I did not listen right away. I made coffee and opened my laptop and worked on my own life like it mattered more than the endless maintenance of theirs, and when I finally hit play and heard that familiar sigh turning into a directive, I felt something I have not felt since I was a teenager, with a secret plan, a calm click inside, the sound of a door locking from my side, and I knew that was the first move, clean and quiet and completely mine, and I knew she would notice the silence, and I knew she would not understand it yet. And that is fine, because understanding is not required for consequences to arrive. The first weekday after that dinner, I woke up with the kind of steady mood you get when you finally stop arguing with gravity. And instead of checking the family thread or the grocery app or the shared calendar that somehow always had my initials next to the boring parts of other people's lives, I made coffee, opened a clean document, and wrote a list that was not a to-do list, but a list of responsibilities that were never mine in the first place yet had been sitting on my shoulders for years. And while I wrote, I could actually feel the shape of my time returning to me, because there was the grocery subscription I had set up during one of Laura's anxious seasons and kept paying for long after it became just another convenience. There was the recurring payment for our mother's lawn service that she swore she would take over once her budget stabilized. There was the automatic renewal for the cloud storage where Laura dumps family photos that somehow turned into a silent bill in my name. And there were all the little authorizations that are not money but feel like it, like being listed as the first call for emergencies that are never emergencies, or being the default driver, or being the person who handles returns because my signature is apparently more patient at counters. I did not send a dramatic manifesto or demand an apology, because grand speeches are the currency of people who do not plan to change, so what I did instead was almost boring, which is why it worked. I logged in and changed the grocery payment method to our mother's card with a note in the account that said the family plan would be managed by the household that consumes it. I canceled the lawn service autopay and transferred ownership of the account back to her profile with a timestamped confirmation email that included the phone number in large friendly letters. I downgraded the cloud storage to a free tier and sent Laura a calm message with the download link and a 30-day clock. And then I went through my phone and edited my contact status on 3 different services, where I had somehow become the point person for other people's choices, setting them to the only thing that has ever saved me, which is no. It was the small admin that cut deepest, because our family runs on the illusion that favors are love and logistics are gratitude, so when I replaced that illusion with receipts and ownership, the sound it made was not an explosion, but a soft click at every door I had been standing in like a human wedge, and even though it felt cold to put numbers and dates to what used to be framed as kindness, I knew that cold is the right temperature for boundaries. So I kept going, and I returned the spare key to my mother in an envelope with a simple line that said I will be home when invited and available, and I removed myself from the group calendar with a short note that said please send direct invitations if you want me present for something specific. And I archived the family task list that always refilled itself with errands that no one wanted to name, but everyone wanted me to complete, and for the first time in years the quiet in my apartment sounded like mine, not like a break before the next request. Our mother called before lunch with the exact blend of irritation and confusion I expected, and she asked if I had messed with her grocery account because the order had pinged her card, and I told her yes, I had moved it to the household that receives the food. And she said she thought we had an arrangement, and I said we did. The arrangement was that I handled it when I volunteered, and I was no longer volunteering, and she said she wished I had warned her, and I said I sent an email with the instructions and the customer service number, which is what she would tell any neighbor who asked her how to fix a problem. And then she tried the line about how Laura is under pressure, and I said we are all under pressure, and that is not a currency I accept anymore. And the conversation died right there, not with a fight, but with a hanging dial tone of two people discovering the limits of their usual tricks. Laura texted later with a long, breathless paragraph that read like a rescue siren wrapped in glitter. Something about a last-minute work presentation and how the storage limit warning was interrupting her uploads, and could I temporarily fix it while she figured out a plan. And I stared at that message for a full minute because the old reflexes in my hands still wanted to perform. They wanted to click and solve and calm and buy her another month. But I am done buying months for adults who are happy to sell my time back to me as love, so I answered with one sentence that said I cannot take this on. Here is the link to the support page, and I put my phone face down and breathed through the feeling that I was letting a fire burn. Even though the truth is there was no fire, there was only smoke and the same old alarm. The next morning I woke up to a different kind of silence. Not the peace in my apartment, but the stalled hum of the family machine, because when the boring jobs do not do themselves, people suddenly discover their hands. And I could tell from the clipped voicemail our mother left that she had spent an hour on the phone with a customer service rep who greeted her the way they greet every person with a problem, which is exactly what she has never offered me. And I will not pretend it did not feel good to hear the edge in her voice, because what I felt was not spite but relief, the kind you feel when a joint pops back into place, and I kept my day exactly as I had planned it. Until late afternoon when my phone lit up with Laura's name and a sound in her voice that I have not heard since we were teenagers in trouble, and she said, through stuttering breaths that turned every word into a stumble, that our mother was not speaking, that she was sitting in her chair and staring at the wall. Like all the noise had been turned down to nothing, and then she asked me what to do, and I said the only honest thing I could say, which was that I would come by when I finished what I was doing, because rushing would mean the old contract was still in force. And while I grabbed my keys, I realized this was the first time in years I was going to that house on my own terms, which is exactly when the plan that had started as a boundary began to feel like a strategy. When I walked into the house after Laura's shaking call and found our mother sitting in that chair with her eyes locked on a spot that did not exist for anyone but her, I did not rush to fill the silence with comfort or instructions or apologies for things I did not do, because I have learned that the fastest way to keep a broken system running is to throw yourself in as the replacement part. So instead, I sat down across from her and let the quiet say whatever it needed to say while Laura paced in the hallway, listing worries and deadlines and the reasons she could not possibly handle anymore. And after a few minutes, I told my sister, in a voice I would use with a coworker who forgot that other people have jobs too, that she should call the primary doctor, explain exactly what she was seeing, and ask for the same-day check, and that I would be here until the nurse called back, but I would not take over the entire situation, because taking over is the thing that cooked us all into this soup. And I watched Laura blink as if the ceiling had moved, and then, to her credit, she made the call and followed the steps, which turned out to be exactly as messy and doable as they always are when someone other than me is the one doing them. While we waited for the nurse line to return the call, I walked through the living room and looked at the wall that has been our family's resume for years, the photos arranged in a way that tells a story whether anyone admits it or not, with Laura's awards and smiling certificates taking the center and my life tucked into corners like footnotes, and I felt the old heat rise up, the one that used to push me into proving I belonged, but I let it pass, because the aim today was not to re-argue the past, but to stop underwriting the present, and that is when the simplest and most ruthless idea came to me, not a trap, not a reveal, just a mirror placed where everyone would have to see it. And I opened the family thread on my phone and typed a message that sounded ordinary, because ordinary is how you move furniture without waking anyone, asking the aunts and cousins to swing by that evening to help set up a few practical supports for Mom for the next weeks, and I added that we would assign specific tasks with dates and backups, which is the language people who love performance pretend not to understand until they are handed a marker and a blank schedule. By early evening, the small parade had arrived with casseroles and opinions and that tired line about how our family always pulls together, and I said that was perfect, because here was a whiteboard and a stack of sticky notes and a list of exactly what needed doing. From rides to appointments to bill reviews to freezer meals to running interference on the neighbor who likes to drop by with gossip that takes an hour to exit the doorway, and I did not raise my voice or point fingers, I simply wrote the tasks and paused after each one while the room scrambled to avoid eye contact, and then I smiled in the nice way I have learned to use at work, the one that says this is easy if you put your name down, and I asked who would like to be first. And eventually, the names started landing on the board, and after the first three it became a kind of game, which is what accountability always becomes when people realize it will be shared and visible, and within 40 minutes the whole month was covered by a dozen adults who claim to love a woman they expect me to manage like a business, and when Laura tried to slide a few of her notes toward my column, I gently slid them back and said I was happy to take one recurring slot for calls and one backup slot for rides, and that she should grab the two she had already promised in the group chat last week, which no one had noticed because no one reads promises when they assume I am the default implementation. Once the schedule was set and the casseroles were labeled and the aunts felt virtuous enough to comment on how refreshing it is to see a plan, I pulled out a simple folder I had brought from my bag. And inside were copies of the autopays and subscriptions and recurring kindnesses I had just transferred back to their rightful owners, and I said I was sharing these not as an invoice, but as a correction to a story we have all been living inside. The one where I am the reliable one because I am strong and Laura is the favorite because she is delicate, when the truer story is that I have been quietly funding and fixing while being told my reliability is just my nature. And that from this week forward we would be matching responsibility to benefit in a way that any adult would call normal if this were an office or a neighborhood association or a church roster. And the room shifted in that almost imperceptible way groups shift when they realize they are not being asked to clap, they are being asked to sign, and behind me I heard our mother make a sound, not words, more like the throat remembering it belongs to a person, and her eyes focused just enough to find mine, and for the first time in a very long time I did not look away first. The nurse finally called back and gave the checklist and the appointment time and the what to watch signs, and Laura took notes because I handed her the pen and said she should be the one to carry the list she always assumed I would memorize. And while she wrote, I opened the family thread and, without drama, changed the group name from the old nickname that has been a shrine to childhood to a plain label that said Family Logistics and Care, and then I posted the photo of the whiteboard with dates and names and a line that said if you need to swap, arrange it directly and confirm in the thread, and Aunt Diane, who has always been kinder in action than in speech, laughed a little and said she liked this new version of me that uses the same project management tone our mother once used to organize charity drives and holiday programs and every room she ever entered, and I said I am just giving our family back to itself, which is the sweetest revenge I know, because the opposite of favoritism is not cruelty, it is fairness with receipts. When everyone left and the house settled into the uneasy quiet that happens after a crowd performs goodness and goes home, I took Laura onto the porch and told her that I was done being the spare battery that everyone plugs into when their plans run out of charge, and that I would show up for specific, named things and I would be kind, but I would not glue the cracks together while everyone else applauded the shine, and Laura nodded with tears she did not try to weaponize, and she whispered that she felt like she had been winning a race no one else was in while the track workers bled off to the side, and I said understanding is free and everything else costs, and when I turned back toward the living room I saw our mother watching. And I knew from the tightness around her mouth that the phase of quiet shock was ending, which is when she usually reaches for a familiar weapon, and I could almost hear the line she would try to throw at me to reset the stage, but this time I had something she did not expect, not a shout and not a plea, just a piece of truth I had tucked into my bag from a drawer she thought I would never open, and when I finally say it out loud, she will not be able to pretend she did not hear it. The morning after the whiteboard parade, I went back to the house with a calm that did not feel like forgiveness and did not feel like anger either. It felt like the kind of focus you get when you finally understand that the story has been rigged by stage directions, and that the only way to win is to take the script, fold it in half, and start speaking in your own voice. So I made coffee in her kitchen, set the mug in front of her without asking if she wanted it, and told Laura to take the appointment folder and go warm up the car while I took care of one small thing that would not look like much now but would matter later. And when the door closed, I opened the old desk that sits under the family calendar. The one with the shallow top drawer that has always been full of coupons and birthday cards and those clipped recipes no one cooks. And I pulled out the thin manila folder I had slipped back there the night before when everyone was busy labeling casseroles. And I set it on my lap, the way you set down something that should have been handed to you years ago and somehow never was. And I said her name once, not loudly, not sweetly, just enough to make sure her eyes found my face and stayed there. I told her I had a sentence to say, and that when I said it she would want to grab the familiar tools, the sigh and the shrug, and the I do not recall, and the quick diversion toward Laura's fragile mood or my supposed stubborn streak. But that none of those things would work today because I had attached copies and timestamps and the parts she cannot rewrite, and then I said the sentence I have never said out loud to her in my life, which was that I found the paperwork where somebody who was not me declined an offer that would have taken me out of this house on a scholarship big enough to change everything, and that the decline was framed as a family decision based on finances and caregiving, and that the email address on the confirmation was hers, and that the printed letter on top was addressed to me but had never been opened because the seal was still intact when I lifted it from the bottom of the drawer where she had buried it under holiday newsletters and notes about Laura's recital dresses and a recipe for something with cranberries that she always swore was a family favorite, but that I never once saw anyone actually request. The look that crossed her face was not shock, because shock is for people who did not see the train coming. It was the look of someone who has known the tracks were there and believed that if she kept the station loud enough no one would hear the whistle. And for a second I thought she might lunge for denial, but what she reached for instead was the old line about how families do what they must, and how timing is everything, and how Laura needed a net, and how I was always the independent one, and I let her say it all because I wanted the words to hang in the air like the smell after a match is struck, and then I said that independence is not an excuse to steal choices, and nets do not work if you crochet them out of someone else's future. And I slid the copies across the table with the dates highlighted and the two sentences I had typed at the top, one that said I did not decline and one that said I am done apologizing for wanting what should have been mine to want. I did not raise my voice, I did not turn it into a courtroom, I turned it into a policy change, because policy is how she always won, 1,000 tiny expectations dressed up as love. So I told her here was the new policy, and it was boring on purpose. That from now on any story told about me in this family would require my signature if it involved my time, my money, my name, or my opportunities, and that included the narratives she floats to cousins and neighbors when she wants to make a point. About the daughter who never needs anything, and I told her there would be one more step because I am done running a private compliance department in the shadows. Which is that tonight I would host a very dull meeting on video with the same aunts and cousins who showed up with casseroles. And I would share a simple timeline of what had been handled quietly by me for years, and what had been handled loudly by the legend of Laura's sensitivity, and then I would share the 2 lines I had printed in large type that would live on the first page of our new family thread, the ones that say no one speaks for me and no one spends me without asking. She looked at me the way a person looks at a bridge they have driven across for decades that suddenly has a toll booth, offended not by the cost, but by the insult of being asked to notice the structure that kept them from the water. And she whispered that I was making a scene where none was needed because she was already suffering, and I said that suffering does not purchase a discount on the truth, that no one gets to stare at a wall and call it penance while the damage sits uncounted, and I told her I wanted something very small before I left for the appointment, not an apology I would have to grade for sincerity, and not a confession that would turn into a fresh excuse. Just a nod that she heard me, and that she would show up on the video like any other adult when I sent the link, and after a long pause where I could see her balancing pride against logistics, she nodded once, short and tight, which was enough. In the car, Laura asked what had happened, and I told her that I had moved a few pieces on the board and that she should focus on the list the nurse gave her. Because tonight we were going to do something that might feel like a storm for a minute, but would make the air cleaner after, and back at my apartment I scanned the documents and I wrote a short, plain message that would go out to the group thread 10 minutes before the call with copies attached and a line at the top that read, "I did not decline and I will not be declined," and I scheduled it because I know how our family plays with timing and I was not going to let anyone get to the story before the story got to them, and as the software asked me to confirm the send, I felt that quiet click again. The sound of a door locking from my side, and I pressed confirm knowing that the moment the files landed and the first ant read the header, the game as they knew it would be over, which is exactly when my mother called and left a message. So brief it could have been a cough, and yet it carried the weight of a white flag she would never wave in public, which is why I did not call back, because tonight the truth would sign in on camera and sit in the center square where her trophies used to hang. By the time the video squares loaded and the familiar faces arranged themselves into that grid of opinions and habits and old loyalties, I had already decided that I was not going to chase anyone's attention and I was not going to ask for permission to tell my own story, so I let the small talk sputter out. I shared my screen with the quiet confidence of someone who finally understands that evidence is kinder than performance, and I showed them the header with the 2 lines that have been burning a groove in my mind since I pulled that folder from the drawer. The lines that said, "I did not decline and I will not be declined," and once those words landed I opened the scans. Starting with the unopened letter addressed to me and the confirmation email sent from my mother's account to the scholarship office that thanked them for their generosity and declined the offer on my behalf due to so-called family needs. And I did not dress it up with outrage or dress it down with excuses. I simply read the pieces that mattered and let the silence do its work while faces shifted into that mix of embarrassment and recognition that only appears when the story people have been fed suddenly meets the receipts they never expected to see. My mother tried to begin with the line she has always relied on, a slow exhale about sacrifice and timing and how Laura's situation left no room for discussion. But this time I did not step forward to absorb the impact or to translate feelings into logistics. I held my voice steady and said that love which steals choices is not love, that independence is not a blank check others get to cash, and that starting tonight we were done with the soft focus version of our family where the favorite is handled like glass and the reliable one is mine like a resource, and because I know this group only respects clarity when it arrives with structure, I repeated the new policy in the same measured tone I use at work when a meeting drifts toward fantasy. That no one speaks for me and no one spends me without asking, and that my consent would be required for anything that touched my time, my money, my name, or my opportunities, which includes the stories told about me to neighbors and cousins when someone needs to make a point about how I never need anything. I could feel the room reaching for the old momentum, the polite pivot toward how we should focus on health and not on the past, so I gave them what they claim to value and rarely practice, which is practical next steps. And I said we already had a care schedule that spreads the work fairly and visibly, that Aunt Diane would own coordination because she is the only one who treats fairness like a habit rather than a favor, and that I would keep one recurring slot and one backup slot and nothing else, and then I added the part that made every square lean in because it was the precise mirror I have waited my whole life to hold up, that since Laura has been first in line for praise and consideration since we were children, she would now also be first in line for signatures and responsibilities that match her adult life, which means the healthcare proxy would be updated to her name. The financial power of attorney would move to Aunt Diane with a named alternate who is not me, and the executor role on the will would be shifted to the person our mother trusts to represent her legacy out loud, which my mother has made clear with every holiday centerpiece and every spotlight at every event is Laura. And to remove the usual fog, I said I had already arranged a notary to stop by tomorrow afternoon, so no one has to drag their feet or pretend the printer is out of ink. Laura started to protest the way people protest when they finally realized the prize came with a bill, a rush of reasons and calendar conflicts and a hint that I was being punitive, and I told her as gently as I could that what I was being was accurate. That being chosen first for the light means being chosen first for the heat, and that I would help within the lanes I defined, but I would not dissolve into the glue that holds everything together while others collect applause for caring. And, to her credit, she swallowed hard and said she would show up for the signature and the schedule because she can either keep the pedestal or keep claiming fragility, but not both. And that is when I turned back to my mother and made the smallest request I have ever made of her, and the only one that mattered now. That she look into the camera and say the sentence she has never allowed herself to say because it would break the spell she built around our family, that I was never second best and that she knows it. For a long moment nothing happened except the little green outline around her square that meant there was sound but no words, and then, with the effort of someone lifting a weight she has trained others to carry for decades, she nodded and said my name and said that she heard me and that she should have let me decide my own life when it was being offered to me. And while it was not a perfect line, and it was not the dramatic confession some people might have wanted, it was enough because it was the first time she did not try to sell me a story while taking something from me at the same time, and I let that be the closing statement, not the beginning of another negotiation. When the call ended, I did something that would have terrified the version of me who used to think peace came from being indispensable. I turned my phone face down. I opened the adult education portal I had bookmarked that morning, and I enrolled in the program I should have left for years ago. Not because I need to prove anything to anyone in that grid, but because I finally refuse to keep living as the infrastructure for other people's narratives. And I paid the deposit with money that used to disappear into autopays labeled as kindness, and I set my class times on the calendar with a hard block that says unavailable, no exceptions. And then I texted the family thread a single sentence that said I will see you at the notary and I will see you at my graduation when it happens, because I do not need witnesses to my struggle, I need witnesses to my choices. The house is quieter now in a way that does not ask me to rescue it, and my mother still drifts into those spells where she stares past the wall as if it could rewrite a decade, but when she looks back at me she sees a person rather than a function. And that is the revenge I wanted all along, the one where I do not punish or plead. I simply stop participating in a myth that required my silence to survive, and if there are people who think I went too far by putting signatures where there used to be assumptions or by making the favorite carry the weight that matches the favor, they can hold that thought while they carry their share, because what I know, finally and without a tremor, is that I did not win by making them suffer, I won by making them see. And by making myself impossible to ignore, which is why when I pass the framed photo wall on my way out, I do not move a single picture. I just leave the front door unlocked behind me for a second longer than usual, long enough for them 2. Feel what a house sounds like when the person who kept it running chooses herself, and then I lock it on my side and go.